Coming up next here in this episode of the Metal Command podcast, Death Angel is a brand new single out called Wrath, Bring Fire. A to Z also has a brand new single called Nothing Is Over. And of course, another great single coming up after that. Metallica is going to reissue their 1996 release, Load, with a super deluxe version of that album. And I have a lot to say about that. And I have been fielding some questions from people about Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth as to where he might go musically. All of that coming up next here on this episode of the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings and welcome back to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited, of course, as always, to be here with everybody today. And of course, if you do want to show your support for the show and you like what you see and hear on this program, by all means, hit the subscribe button, hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And if you follow the show in any other form of social media or streaming service, by all means, give the show a like and a follow there. Okay, so today's episode, I'm going to talk about the brand new single by A to Z, and they also have another great single coming out very, very soon, and it will probably come out by the time that you end up watching this episode. Metallica is reissuing the album Load. And they have a super deluxe version of that album coming out with a lot of really cool stuff in it. I'm going to talk about the Load album and how I look at it and how a lot of the Metallica fans responded to it. And I'm going to kind of give you my experience of listening to the album when it first came out. And honestly, I haven't heard that album in probably probably 25 years, maybe longer. So I'm going to talk about that record and that reissue. We have a brand new single by the band A to Z. They have a second album coming out called A to Z 2, and that song is called Nothing Is Over. Of course, that is a band featuring Mark Zonder from Fates Warning, along with Ray Alder, who's also in Fates Warning, and I have a couple great guitar players, Nick Van Dyke and Simone Mulroney. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that album as well, because I have heard it. And the album is absolutely incredible. So I'm going to get into that. And I'm going to talk about Jon Schaffer, because a lot of you have been writing me questions about where I think he should go musically when and if he decides to make music again. So with that said, let me start off with the first topic. Let's talk about Death Angel. Death Angel, of course, with a brand new song called Wrath, Bring Fire. Brand new single. Just came out. And, Death Angel has been a band that I have often praised as being one of the more consistent thrash metal bands out there. Definitely, since they came back. Now, for me personally, as a fan of Death Angel and someone that really loves their music, I think Mark Asageda is a great singer. And they've really, ever since The Art of Dying came out, they've really been putting out, kick-ass album after kick-ass album. I've seen them live several times. The band is, for me, has been top-notch for 20 years. And they have been putting out great album after great album. And so I get excited when a new single comes out, because I'm thinking to myself, awesome. I cannot wait for some new Death Angel. Now, personally, and I always like to be fair and give my perspective as to what my preferences are as far as what I like and dislike about a band musically. I have never really been a huge fan of the early Death Angel albums before they broke up, after the bus accident. Like Act 3, I think, is okay. I like the Ultraviolence. I don't think it's bad for what it is. But for the most part, the early albums from like the late 80s, and, obviously Act 3, I think those albums are okay, but I think Death Angel and the material they have been putting out over the last, 20 plus years, I think in my opinion, far exceeds what they did when the band first came out. So I love the new stuff. So let's talk about the single. Now, obviously, as I've said in a past review not long ago about the Kerry King solo album, I thought Mark Asagaitis I think he sounds great with Kerry King's solo band. And, I was kind of thinking to myself, man, Death Angel's probably not going to be doing very much now that he is singing in this band, but that is not the case. There is a brand new single that came out. And of course, me being somebody that absolutely loves this band, I flocked to that single right away. As soon as I was notified this thing came out, I saved it to listen to it when the single finally, came out on YouTube Music. And I'm going to be honest with you folks, something I'd never thought I would ever hear myself say about a Death Angel song. And that is, it was a little bit underwhelming. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I don't think the song is bad by any means. Some people, that I've talked to that, follow thrash metal, think it's kind of uninspired. They don't think it sounds very good. They think the song is kind of not well written. And there are people that, of course, absolutely love it. In fact, one of my friends who is very picky about stuff that, bands put out, who really definitely typically does not like Death Angel's music, really loves the song. Now for me, and I'm listening to this track, and I've listened to it for, probably 20 or 30 times now over and over again, because, as somebody that reviews music or listens to it, I try to really give it as much of a chance as I possibly can. And then I wait a day or two at minimum to see how well the music resonates with me. Sometimes I'll listen to an album for a couple weeks before I really want to review it. Because sometimes you listen to something, you don't like it right away. Sometimes you listen to it and you love it right away, but then later on, maybe you don't like it as much. So I like to let the music grow on me, when I listen to something new. And so I gave this song, a few days here to sink in. And for me, it's kind of like, I could take it or leave the song. The middle portion of it, where the guitar solos come in, I think is the best part of the song. I mean, that part of the song I think is great. It's got a great groove to it. I just don't think Mark Asagaitis sounds as inspired singing on this as he did, say, on this last Kerry King album. Now, as I often point out, and as I often have said, record labels and bands, especially record labels, typically do not do a great job picking out a single for the new album by whatever band is on that label. There are labels that do a great job. There are bands that do a great job, but generally speaking, and Nuclear Blast is definitely not a label that I will absolve of this. Record labels just pick bad singles these days. They really do. And what I mean by that is they typically do not pick some of the best songs on the album. So, even though I think this song is a little bit underwhelming, and it's, if I were to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say it's average. I would say it's a 5 out of 10. Nothing about it jumps out at me that really excites me. But because of the track record that Death Angel has with me, as far as the albums they put out, as far as my like of the, as far as the fact I like those records, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I probably will say the album is still going to be pretty solid and pretty good. But right now, for me, this track, 5 out of 10. I would say it's very plain and average for me. Looking at the past track record, too, with this band, it's interesting. They've typically, the record label Nuclear Blast, to their credit, has typically picked, in my opinion, some of the better songs as the singles for every Death Angel album that has come out, in the last 20 years. So, it's one of those things where, for me, because I've liked so much of their material, and pretty much every album they've put out, I think, has been very good. I'm going to guess right now, as it sits, that this is not one of the better songs on the album. At least that's what I want to believe. Now, there are many instances, in fact, most instances, where I hear a single I'm underwhelmed by. I hear the record and I love it. And there are the occasional time, you have the occasional time where you hear a great single, then the record is just like, it's garbage. But that's very rare. So that's where I see the song, folks. I see this song as kind of, it's just there. It's not great. It's not bad. It is Death Angel. It definitely sounds like them. It has their signature sound, but it feels like something is missing from it. And that's where I'm at with this new Death Angel song. I'll put it in the show notes, folks, and I want to hear your opinion. Do you like this song? Do you think this song is good? Or do you dislike it? Leave a note in the comments about this track. I definitely want to read your opinion on what you all think. Speaking of new songs, let's go to the next part. Segment number 2 of this episode. Let's talk about A to Z. An album I am really, really excited for. Now, they have a brand new single called Nothing Is Over. They have another single coming out called I Am Numb. Folks, let me just say this. Earlier in the full episode of this podcast, and you hear me often talk about bands and often say things like, when they pick singles, they pick the worst songs on the album. Typically, I always talk about record labels doing that, right? I would say with A to Z, they have not done that. And the reason being is that there are no bad songs on their upcoming album. Now, the upcoming album is called A to Z 2. I will admit to you right now, because I am allowed to tell you that I have heard the entire album. In fact, I've been listening to it off and on for quite a while now. Normally, I don't tell people that. A lot of bands that I know will send me their full album, sometimes months before it comes out. I don't tell anybody who those bands are. But for the specific purposes of this podcast, I did ask Mark Zonder if I can talk about the record. So here I am talking about the album. So obviously the first A to Z album, if you listen to my review when that came out, I think it was a couple years ago now, I said it was the perfect album. Great production, fantastic songwriting, fantastic musicianship. It has more of an AOR vibe than, say, a Fates Warning vibe. So if you're looking for Fates Warning, that's not what this is going to be. Very well-crafted songs. There are some progressive elements to the album. Don't get me wrong. You obviously have Ray Alder singing on it. You have Mark Zonder on drums. You have a phenomenal group of musicians, and the guitarists, Simone Maroney, and of course Nick Van Dyke, who you may know from the band Redemption. Incredible guitar playing. Simone's leads on this album are absolutely incredible. And Nick is also an incredible guitar player. So just overall, just a fantastic group of musicians on this album. Seriously, fantastic. Now, how does the album compare to the previous one? Because I said the previous album is basically the perfect record, right? I'm not going to get too far into the review of it until it comes out. All I am going to say is that this second A to Z album, in my opinion, blows away the first one. It's heavier. It actually kind of reminds me of Journey on steroids. It's hard. You have to, once you listen to the whole album, folks, you'll understand what I'm talking about, but it is absolutely incredible. They basically did something very few bands have been able to do. And I'll probably say this in a review when the album officially comes out. This is a band that put out an amazing debut album. And when bands come out with a debut album that blows you away, typically the second release is sort of disappointing. And I have news for you. This album definitely does not disappoint. And I like it even better than the first album, as I said before. So the new single, Nothing Is Over, I think is an incredible song. They have another single coming out called I Am Numb. But it doesn't matter what song you release off this record. Every single one of them is absolutely fantastic. And if you like what you hear as far as the singles go, you are definitely going to absolutely love the album. Now, I'll put a link in the show notes to the song and to the upcoming single if it's up. And there's also some really cool special merchandise that they have, that they are selling. A lot of autographed like drum heads with the album cover on it. There was a big steel plate with the album cover with the band signing it. I actually have one from the first A to Z album, which I thought was really, really cool. I don't have it sitting in front of me, but I'll put a link to that merchandise as well. Now, the pre-order is up. Wherever you are, I ended up pre-ordering mine off of Metal Blade Records. I got the cool like marbled blue vinyl, which I think looks awesome, and the CD. And don't forget, folks, Mark Zonder is going to be appearing on the show, probably maybe just himself or a couple other members of the band. Now, many of you heard my description that the album sounds like Journey on steroids, which it does. But for those of you that want to know what it sounds like from the perspective of the band, check out this interview with myself and Mark Zonder from a few months ago talking about this upcoming A to Z album. Check out this clip right here. If you guys had to describe if you guys had to describe this new A to Z album compared to the previous record, just give a quick description of it. What would your description be? If someone comes up to you and says, you have another album coming out, what does it sound like compared to the first one? What would you say to them?
You're up, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say that's a Mark question because I didn't work on the first record. To me, the first record sort of tapped into a 70s vibe, and I think this taps a little bit more, maybe because of my, time frame, more into an 80s vibe. This to me sounds like, an aggressive version of early 80s Journey. Toto, another great reference point, just with a little bit more beef and a little bit more chunk in the guitar tone, maybe. But that's sort of how I would look at the reference point. But I think this is a Mark question more than a Nick question.
So
sure.
Nick basically just called me old with that one, but okay.
Not much older than me, pal.
There's a different approach, obviously. Songwriting, it's heavier, but it's not heavier in a grungy, grindy kind of thing. I like to sometimes go back, and I kind of tripped on this the other day with, you have the first three Journey albums, and, no Steve Perry, but the playing's kind of like intense, and it's all over the place. It's jazz, fusion, rock, metal, whatever. And then you have Steve Perry come into it later, who, on that, especially the Infinity album with Wheel in the Sky and other things, before it really went commercial, they were kind of in that thing. So, not to keep referencing Journey, but it does have kind of that kind of thing to it. Edge of the blade, separate ways. There's a heaviness. The other thing I think that's a major difference, there's two major differences, is the guitar playing and the way the approach was taken, especially in the mixing of and the ability to take the sound and really make it happen. That Simone took care of with that, as far as from a mix point of view. But the role of the keyboards. In the first record, the role of the keyboards were more of, yes, Genesis, because that's where Viv was coming from, kind of more of that lighter kind of thing. But this one is definitely John Lord. Jimmy's all about the B3 and the Leslie and that kind of thing. It's just, this is more of I can see this the one thing I really like about this record is I can see this record letting us play with bands that are a little heavier, where we only had the first record in that style, we could have never gone that far as the heaviness. Still has the big choruses, still has the big hooks. There's no 12-minute songs. It's just like in your face. You're supposed to get up and move. That's what it's about. You're supposed to be able to feel it in the groove and the pulse, and then all the frosting that goes on the top.
That sounds like a good description. I would probably say my description, at least from what I've heard, is a combination of what you and Nick said. Like when you talk about kind of going, like 80s a little bit, Edge of the Blade was like the first thing that I thought of actually when listening to the stuff, but it doesn't sound dated. It sounds a lot more modern than that, but it's the same kind of songwriting in a sense. And yeah, I mean, there is a difference. I think the songs are just as catchy as the first album, but I think it's just a little bit of a heavier record.
I think also there's a little bit more of syncopated playing at times, and it definitely a little bit more progressive per se, as not just boom tap boom tap boom tap. There's things, and you can catch it after the first 4 bars, but it's not so Survivor, REO Speedwagon, kind of like just straight, kind of great songs, but just straight. We kind of get a little funky at times, and but it works. I mean, it works amazingly well.
And the album sounds good.
Simone is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, by the way, you can only do so much if the raw ingredients don't sound great. And Mark is so dialed in with his drums, and reasonably dialed in at this point on good guitar tone. And certainly it's stuff that Simone knows how to mix, because he's done, probably 3 or 4 records with my guitar tone now that he helped actually dial in. So yeah, and then Philip has an unbelievable bass tone. And the other thing is, in contrast, the Redemption, by the way, this is by no means a AC/DC record. There's a lot going on, not to take anything away from them. There's a lot going on here. There's less going on. Redemption's been described as like a 12-layer chocolate cake. Sometimes there's an awful lot going on. Here it breathes a little bit more. So I think the ability for Simone to make it just sound as good as it can sound without having to service 7 different counterpoints that are happening at the same time frees him up to make it really sound great.
Yeah.
To Nick's point, people don't realize this. I mean, older people realize, younger people don't realize that a mix engineer is just as important as anybody in the band.
Mm-hmm.
I've done enough records with enough different guys, and there's a true story. Before the first record, again, my whole thing was, we're going to do this the right way. I don't care what it costs. We're just going to do it the right way. So I auditioned or sent out a track to like 7 or 8 mix guys. I mean, we're talking Grammy. I was fortunate enough to be hooked into a Grammy Award guy, 9 Grammys, whatever. All the way to whoever and whatever, nobody you ever heard of, and guys, serious guys in between. Greg Bissonette turned me on to a bunch of different pro guys. No one even came close to Simone. I mean, not even close. It was so obvious who the guy was that was going to do it. Plus, he's the greatest guy in the world. He's that guy that I almost feel like during this record, he's sitting right here, because I'll write him an email and say, hey, can you take care of this? Boom, taken care of. Hey, Nick thinks this. Can you take care of it? Boom, done. I mean, yeah, it's like your hand is going through the computer to his console,
And that's Nick Van Dyke and Mark Zonder talking about the next A to Z album. And that interview was actually a few months ago. So I had luckily heard most of the album when I did that interview, but really excited for this record, folks. And I think that if you like progressive music and you like AOR-oriented music with great melodies, great hooks, well-written songs, you are definitely going to like this album by A to Z. A to Z 2 comes out soon. I'll put a link in the show notes to where you can pre-order it. And I'm curious as to what you folks think of the new single, Nothing Is Over. So with that said, I'm going to go into break. Coming up, I'm going to talk about Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth and where he could possibly go musically. And I talk about Metallica's Load album getting a reissue and the crazy Super Deluxe box set that is coming out. All of that next after the break. I'll see you right after this. Hey everybody, it's Tony here from the Metal Command Podcast. I appreciate you watching this program, and if you want to see more of what I offer on this show, please by all means hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell to be notified anytime I do post a video, follow me on any other social media outlet that you see this program, and again, I appreciate all of your support. Okay, back here from the break here on the Metal Command Podcast, Tony here with you. So let's get into Jon Schaffer from Iced Earth. He is a subject that I've brought up on this show in the past, as many of you have gone and watched the discussion I had with him. I had a group discussion about him. I commented on his first ever interview. He's actually done 2 interviews now that I know of. And I talked about his specific situation, and then basically left it at that, right? What has said has been said. There's really nothing more to add to Jon and his situation, because now that he's done an interview, I've commented on it. He's been pardoned. I figured, you know what? That's the end of it. I had a big in-depth discussion about him. And so when and if he does decide to release music, I'll be excited to hear it, whatever it is. However, I have been receiving emails from people. And people have been asking me this question over the last month and a half. People asking me, what kind of music do I think he should write, and what kind of music do I think he should create? And to be honest with you, I didn't really answer the question at first. And then I started writing everybody back, and I told them that he should write, or he should do whatever is in his heart and whatever he feels like doing. Because personally, I am nobody to tell anyone what they should or shouldn't do, especially an artist. And it doesn't matter whether they are creating music, doing photography, maybe they are a painter, whatever the case may be. I told everybody it's really not my place to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do. Now, obviously, one of the things that I think it's great about the fact that, you know, when he joined a church, he joined a non-denominational church. Because typically when you have a large organization, those, you know, large churches and large organizations can be just as corrupt as any government for that matter. But when you join something that's non-denominational, you're not answering to any kind of crazy hierarchy. It's usually more of a tight-knit community. And I think that was good for him to do that. You can tell with the interview that he did, especially the second interview on the podcast of The Wicked, he felt more comfortable. And he's obviously in a much better place than probably where he was a couple years ago. He just seemed very comfortable in that second interview. So people have been asking me that question. And so then I had people writing me, okay, you aren't somebody to tell him what he should or shouldn't do. But as a fan of his music, what do you think would be really cool? Like, do you think, you know, what do you, as a fan, what would you like to see him do? What would be something really cool that he could do? And then I thought about that, and I didn't answer right away. And then I realized, you know what? You know, there is one thing I think would be very cool if he did it. And again, this is not me telling the guy what he should or shouldn't do. And regardless, even if I did, he probably wouldn't care about my opinion when it comes to that. He's just going to do whatever he wants to do. But I think something that would be really cool for him to do, and I'm going to assume his music is going to have the same type of sound that it normally has. I mean, Iced Earth has a signature sound. Jon has a signature way of playing guitar. Like when I hear a riff that Jon plays, if you were to play it to me, and I was blindfolded, I would know that he did it. But Iced Earth has written some really cool albums. He wrote an album about all of the horror movie monsters with Horror Show. You had The Glorious Burden, which was a tremendous concept album about the history of America. And you also had the Something Wicked albums, concept albums. And Iced Earth has always had a very dark tone to their music. I mean, they're not like a happy power metal band from Europe. I mean, these guys, Iced Earth has been always had that edge, that kind of dark sound to their music. So you know what I think would be really cool, especially with the fact that Jon, has found Christ, has found religion. I think a really cool concept album that Jon could do, and I think with the fact that he is part of a church and he is a Christian, I think a great concept album he could write about would be The Passion of the Christ. Now, hear me out on this. One, being a Christian, I think Jon would write about this and be very inspired to do it if he decided to put his mind to it and wanted to do it. And I think the dark tone from Iced Earth's music would be a perfect fit for that story. Like I grew up Catholic. I grew up Roman Catholic. And you see, in many churches, Catholic churches, you see a lot of crucifixes. A sculpture of a guy nailed to a cross. But I don't think people realize just how brutal and how awful crucifixion actually was. When the Romans would do that to somebody, that was an awful way to go out. And I don't think people realize the amount of suffering Jesus went through when they crucified him. It's one thing to look at a sculpture or to read about it. It is a completely different thing when you portray it in the brutal manner that it actually is. Like if you've ever seen the movie The Passion of the Christ, folks, that wasn't a beating, that was a mauling. What was portrayed in that movie was brutal and pretty close to what the guy actually went through. And when I say what the guy went through, I'm talking about Jesus. I think there are a lot of elements of that story that can also apply to real life. In that second interview that he did with the podcast of The Wicked, for example, he talked about being betrayed by band members. Judas betrayed Jesus. You could write a song about that. And it can have a double meaning. So I think that would be something that would be really cool. And the fact that Iced Earth has a very dark tone to their music, I think it would fit that story like a glove. Anyway, folks, I'm not here to tell the guy what he should or shouldn't do. I'm just saying, as a fan of his music, I think that would be a cool subject for him to visit musically. Now, have bands done that before? Gravedigger did it with The Last Supper. They kind of touched on it. I know Trouble did an album on it, I believe, or at least, did a record that was sort of like that back in the mid-'80s. Stryper, obviously a Christian band, has written about it. But none of those groups could really put that story into perspective in the same way that Jon could with Iced Earth and the type of music that he writes. Anyway, it's just a thought. That is my answer to the question that so many of you have been asking me and writing me about. I hope whatever he does, he is successful at it and he's happy doing it. But if you were to ask me something, what I think would be a cool subject to visit, that would be it. Now let's get to the last segment of this show. Let's talk about Metallica re-releasing and reissuing their 1996 release, Load. I think it came out in 96. Yeah. Man, it's been a long time since that album came out, right? So Metallica has a super deluxe version of this album coming out. It's a big box set. It's going to be very similar to the previous box sets. I own all 5 of them. I can tell you that when it comes to putting a box set out, Metallica is basically the gold standard for that. And that box set's going to have over 250 unreleased tracks, like live songs, like live shows, demos, B-sides, different versions of songs on that album. And if you're into box sets and you like the Load album, guarantee you that you are going to like the super deluxe box set version of it. Because the previous 5 I own, and all 5 of those box sets are fantastic. I mean, each one of them, you could spend a month going through each one of them. It's pretty much what I did. Going through all the interviews, unreleased tracks, live shows. And the box set for Load looks awesome. Especially if you are a fan of that album. And even if you aren't, when you look at the content that super deluxe set actually has in it, you can appreciate the thought and the time that went into even creating the concept as to what to put on it. The band definitely had to spend a lot of time going through a lot of the archives to put anything and everything they could into it. And if you are really into those records, I'm telling you folks, every one of these Metallica box sets are fantastic. So with that said, let's talk about Load, Metallica's follow-up to the Black Album. So obviously, this was an album where you had fans of the new Metallica and you had the old school fans, many of whom did not like the record. So I'm going to give you my perspective of it when it came out. So I was in high school when the album came out. I remember like it was yesterday. Now, I graduated high school right around the time this album came out. And I remember when it came out, the promotion for it was insane. Now, granted, this is before streaming. This is before the internet really blew up. Every music store you went into, whether it was a large department store, like a Walmart type thing, or a Best Buy, to your local music shop, because you had a lot of those still in existence back then. Promotional materials galore for the Load album. Now, keep in mind, the self-titled Metallica album, the Black Album, was and still is, I believe, their highest selling album and the most successful. And I still think it sells like, I don't know, a couple thousand copies a week. I could be wrong, but for a long time, they were just still selling albums like every week of this thing. And I remember the hype. I remember every single music store had a listening party before they would officially sell the album at midnight. So I went to one of those listening parties, actually. I got there very late, went with a friend of mine. He was an old school Metallica fan. He definitely did love the Black Album. Keep in mind. So the story's kind of funny. We go to this music store. I don't remember which one it was now. I'd like to say it was a music store called the Quonset Hut, which I don't believe exists anymore here in the Cleveland area. But we went there for a listening party, I believe. I believe that's where it was at. We ended up getting there late. We got there right around midnight when the album came out, and then they sold the album. So I didn't get to hear really anything. So we get in his car, and I remember we get to the first 2 songs. So we get to the first song, Ain't My Bitch. I actually thought that song was kind of cool. And then the song 2x4 came out, and my buddy at the time ejected the CD, put it back in the case, and whipped it out the window and said, "This is BS. Metallica now really has sold out," and that he was no longer a fan. Now, interestingly enough, when we got to this listening session, he ended up getting the last copy of the album, so there wasn't one that I could buy. But I know there was a line out the door at this place, if I remember correctly, to buy the new Metallica album, Load. The logo looked different. The cover was a little bit weird, obviously. So it wasn't until like a week later I was finally able to go to a music store. Now, the music store I went to get a copy of the album is a music store called The Exchange. It was called the Record Exchange back then. But they sold and still sell lots of used vinyl and used CDs, and of course new and used CDs and vinyl, plus a lot of other cool stuff. A local company here in Cleveland. And I remember showing up to it, going into the store, and I went and happened, before I can get to the new CDs, I happened to look to my left. They had what was called the bargain bin. And you had a whole bunch of used CDs. There were probably 100 Metallica Load CDs in there. And there were so many, they were selling them for like $5. So you know what? I just went and got a used one. You know, $5 was a lot more money back then than it is now. You know, again, that was close to, it was like it was about 29 years ago. And I went and listened to the album. And folks, I'll be honest with you, I've not listened to this album in well over 25 years. Up until now. And I thought the album wasn't as bad as everybody thought it was, but I really didn't think it was all that great. I would probably say I liked about half the songs on it. And I was a bit underwhelmed. I loved the Black Album. I loved the first 5 records, actually. My introduction to Metallica actually was Ride the Lightning, and that album is what ended up getting me into metal. It's still my favorite album by them. But the change of sound really didn't bother me too much. I just didn't care for the songwriting. I liked Until It Sleeps. Ain't My Bitch was great. I mean, there were some good songs on it, but I kind of liked half the record. That was back then. Now I decided to say, you know what? Let me go revisit this album again, because I have not listened to it. Aside from the occasional song from it that may have come on the radio. But I haven't listened to it in over a quarter century. And I still remember Until It Sleeps playing on the radio nonstop. That single was out for quite some time. And going back and listening to it now as compared to back then, I like it a little better. For me, it's still kind of like, I like Reload actually better than Load. Reload I thought was a much better record. But Load I'm kind of like, I like half of it. I still feel the same way. Although I like the half of the album I do like, I appreciate it and like it more than I did back then. Now, is it an album that I'm going to listen to on a daily basis? No. When I reach for Metallica, it's usually the first 5 records. The last album wasn't too bad. But the Load album has some decent tracks on it. I don't think it's as bad as what everybody says it is, or as good as some people. I think it's just kind of like there. It's kind of like they changed their sound. They had the guy liner going on, if you remember that. But I do like the album a little bit better than I did when I was in high school. So they have this super deluxe version coming out. Folks, I can't emphasize enough. If you love this album, and judging